Welcome to Front and Center with Steve Berriman and myself. I'm Michael Maxetti. Uh, I wanted to say something to people and ask them please to follow on. Uh, we often talk about things that may be contrary to your perspective, your understanding. Please stay with us though. And in the comments on YouTube, wherever you're going to watch it, please feel free. Say what you want back to us. We'll respond to you. It's about seeking the whole truth together. That's one of our core concepts. And the only way we do that is by listening to each other and expanding our thinking. And I come from a very different background than Steve's. We've been friends now and partners for the last 12 plus years since we first met. I coming from a historically conservative background that transitioned into, if you will, into a independent thinking person back in 2010, prior to meeting Steve. And Steve comes out of a lifetime of a very progressive world. And we started off from a very different perspectives, and through our conversations and friendship, I have to say I have great love for Steve, and he made his livelihood for 38 plus years professionally as a comedian on the road, and he makes me laugh all the time. So with that, I'd like to just say, Steve, I know you have some things that you'd like to share with those who are watching and our audience from our last show. So please share with us what's happened since our last podcast.
Well, our last podcast, I did my retrospective on the election, how the right got right and left got left, and I've had some very, very interesting responses that I'd like to share based on that, and that will lead very well into the our Young Turk, our older Young Turk excerpt that we're going to play from Cenk Uygur in regards to how a progressive who is awake reacted to the election results and was able to have the perspective to call out his own side. And so I want to reiterate, Michael, what you just said, that what's very, very important here is that each of us has our own perspective. There's a limitation to what we know, but one of our precepts at Front and Center is seeking the whole truth together. And that indicates that we want to hear from people. We want to hear all of the nuances that people are bringing to the conversation. There's no, we don't want to hear this. We want to hear everything because we believe that in the aggregate, that's what's going to help us really understand and make sense of our current situation and find the ways to create an independent movement that involves collaboration.
And help us move towards, when we started off, Steve, if you remember, our initial subtitle slogan was writing our news story together.
That's right.
Then as we had the conversations, then we decided that from political battlefields to cooperative playing fields was a little more appropriate. But yeah, writing our news story together.
Exactly.
So Steve, you wanted to read some of those.
Yeah, now it's very interesting. I got one cancel. I got one person saying goodbye, Steve. That was all she wrote. But here are some very I don't know, maybe either she was gonna go kill herself or she was telling me that she wasn't gonna receive my emails anymore. So what's very, very interesting, I'm gonna read to you two emails from two different women in response to what I wrote. First one, thank you so much. It's refreshing to hear you say what I also think myself, but have not had the courage to speak out and then have to endure the wrath of the progressives I know. I was fairly traumatized by the reactions I got from dear old friends during the scamdemic for questioning and not getting jabbed. Unquote. That's one person. Now here's the second individual. Quote, I would be afraid to tell any of my friends or family that I voted for Trump because I would probably be ostracized. Same as for my stance on the poison shot. My friends and family have all gotten COVID and are still getting it even with the shot and the boosters. It's nice to know that I'm not alone in my thinking, which seems to coincide with your views. You are a very brave man to put those thoughts out there. I guess I'm a coward keeping all those kinds of thoughts to myself. Keep on keeping on, you brave souls.
You know,
Michael, do you have any response to that?
well, yeah, one thing is I hope people will listen to, and there's a link at the bottom on our show notes all the time for that song that is our theme song, Courage. And I hope they'll go and click on that. It takes you to a YouTube and listen to that song about having the courage to be who you are at this time and always. But uh, listen to that song, Courage. It makes me think of that.
Yeah. So what I'm recognizing now is that the irony, again, we're all suffering from irony deficiency, and it's the job of comedians to pump ironies, to bring them to consciousness and awareness. And here is the party that branded itself as defending democracy, and yet inside that party, people are not free, do not feel free to speak their minds. And so consequently, inside this echo chamber, uh, what happened is that people simply believe what they continue to believe. And even now, I'm on a listserv with a number of fairly well-known MDs and of various political viewpoints. And I posted this piece, which was the conclusions of the Congressional Committee on COVID, on the COVID response. And it was very critical of every one of the policies. And so I posted it, and one of the people said, "Oh, well, they're just Republicans. Of course they're going to say that." So there's no sense of curiosity. There's no sense of any possible sane position above and beyond what they already believe. And that's the listening that we're speaking into, or the lack of listening. So, as we're going to play a little excerpt from Cenk Uyghur's interview, where he calls out his own side, I think this is going to give us an indication of how rare this is. And of course, he was roundly attacked. He is no longer now considered a progressive. He's no longer considered a leftist. Somehow he is a traitor. And every one of the people who have done that, you can track it, whether it's Tulsi or Bobby Kennedy or any of these people. They now have a special new epithet. Now Bobby Kennedy, I found out from my friend, he is a sexual predator. So now that he's classified as a sexual predator, we can no longer need to listen to him. Tulsi Gabbard, well, she's just a Russian stooge. We no longer need to listen to her.
We're gonna go into that for our audience, a lot of some examples of the very specifics of that. So let's play that sync clip, if you would, Annette.
Understand. They think you guys are all MAGA, and MAGA means it's a cult, and you're never going to disagree with Trump. You're never going to disagree with each other, and that you are like their father's Republicans. But you're not their father's Republicans. And so our side, I've been trying to get them to realize that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, all these folks that take the money, they're not on your side. They're on the establishment side, right? And for you guys on the right, when I used to debate you, and I don't mean you guys in specific, I mean in general, all I would get is wall-to-wall talking points. Oh, Mitch McConnell knows what he's doing. Oh, John Cornyn is the best. Oh, George Bush, Dick Cheney, etc. And we've been around forever. We're the longest running show in internet history, right? We're the first YouTube partner channel ever. That makes me like the original YouTube, right? Wow. And so I battled the Cheneys. I battled all those guys in the Bush years, right? And then I hit Obama from the left, and people got super mad. I mean, that's part of the reason why I had the huge blowout with MSNBC, and I left MSNBC because they didn't want me to hit Obama, and they didn't want me to hit the Democrats. So I've been doing that from day one. And guys, today, I think that, we could do something historic. I think that we could actually unite the left flank and the right flank. And I've got a model for how to do that, and I want to run it by you guys.
Steve, did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, so here we have the potential for a breakthrough here. As again, I've said this before, when I first watched Bobby Kennedy addressed the MAGA crowd in the first rally after he decided to join that campaign. And I watched those people respond to Bobby Kennedy's, one might say, radically leftist ideas. What I saw was a new kind of populism emerging that the left has been waiting for but doesn't realize it. So what Cenk is saying is that our opportunity is now, that we have the opportunity to bring the progressive left and the populist right together uh, to stand to stand how do I put it, to address the establishment that he calls the establishment. Some might call it the deep state. Some might call it the uniparty. And he's acknowledging that Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and that Democratic Party establishment is part of this unistate, the same that includes Dick Cheney and Lynn Cheney and so on. And so here is the opportunity, should I think he's addressing the progressives awaken from this trance of separation. What an opportunity we have to create a true people's movement from all sides together to hold our system accountable and to truly address and end the corruption.
To that point, exactly, Steve, there was just recently some quotes that give credence to what you just said. This is a real opportunity, and there are some leading Democrats starting to speak up. And this issue of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, is one of the key unifying issues that can bring people together. Let me highlight a couple of quotes that I just saw. One was from Mayor Ryan. He said, "We are a sick." This was on the View show, and he said, "quote We are a sick country, and a sick country cannot maintain long-term prosperity." Kennedy is passionate about this issue, and he's willing to take on the entrenched interests that have perpetuated this broken system for decades. So that's a rare moment that can spark transformative change. Also, just recently, Democrat Senator Cory Booker of New York came out with, quote, he, RFK Jr., he's talking about here, talks about the issues I'm talking about. We're talking out of the same playbook. Another breakthrough, Democrat Governor Jared Polis, again talking about Kennedy, quote, RFK Jr. helped us defeat vaccine mandates in Colorado in 2019, and he will help make America healthy again by shaking up, and it's HHS and FDA. And one last, the quote I was giving earlier, there's Eric Adams was on The View. I'm sorry, I spoke out of it was Paul Ryan from the Republican side. But Eric Adams, who was speaking on The View, said, let's be clear. We have a real problem with food in our country, and we need to watch what we're feeding our children. We have to bring down this rhetoric in our conversation. You know, Obama said it, and I agree. This is not the divided states of America. This is the United States of America. So those are the kind of messages that already are starting to emerge from various leaders within the Democratic Party and establishment. So this issue of pluralism, populism rather, versus establishment or other names for it, we can get into it in a couple of minutes. Steve, did you want to comment on anything further from Cenk?
Yeah, let's look at this. Let's look at another piece where he actually talks about the rules of engagement, new rules of engagement have been the new rules of engagement that can actually rehumanize one another and actually begin the process of our working together. You know, one of the big problems with the cancel culture is that if you cancel enough people, if you deplatform enough points of view, your big tent becomes a little pup tent. And I think that's one of the things that our man Cenk is going to be calling out. Very few people have actually talked about this, but because of how the Democrats have demanded uniformity, ironically, uniformity in following the narrative, they had excluded people. They had Bobby Kennedy. They had Tulsi Gabbard. They had them in their big tent. And then you wonder why you've lost. So let's hear this. And then it's going to segue into a prescription for how we begin to communicate and collaborate together.
The real problem with the left and the Democratic Party these days culturally is we don't want you, we don't want you, we don't want you. If there's a 2% disagreement, we want to cancel you and get you the hell out of here. Right wing, in my opinion, has their own version of cancel culture. We can get into that. But if the right wing, you agree with them 2%, they're like, oh, come in, come to the party. Oh, yeah, come on in, come on in. And if one party's constantly pushing people out and the other party's constantly inviting them in, well, at some point, the party inviting them in has the bigger tent, and you not only win the election, you win the popular vote. So the Democrats have to get out of this mindset of, you must agree with Democratic leadership, and if you don't, you're ruining unity. Shut up and get back in line. No, hell no. Young Turks have never been in line. We're never going to get in line. We're not going to get in line for MAGA. We're not going to get in line for the Democratic Party. And these idiots said, bow your head to Joe Biden. And Pat, you know, I was on the show. I was on every show, and I said, what are you guys, nuts? His brain is falling out of his ear. He's shaking hands with invisible people. He thinks his uncle was eaten by cannibals. You guys are lunatics, and I will not agree to being a lunatic for your agenda. So look, to me, like, look, I want to propose this as rules for the internet. Here, go for it. But it's so important that both the right wing and left wing agree with this, right? So let me bounce it off you guys. Number one rule: when we disagree, we fight. And there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong. It's America. Okay, we disagree. We got freedom of speech. Let's rumble. Let's brawl. There's nothing wrong with it.
What do you mean rumble and brawl?
I mean, of course, rhetorically, politically,
Debating.
not violent.
Right now,
because as simple as that sounds, that was not popular with the left the last 8 years. We've invited so many people from the left, and we will always invite them, but unfortunately, they don't like to fight as much as the other side likes to fight. Okay,
Yeah, rule number two of the internet. Afterwards, you must have a beer together. Okay,
Tip O'Neill and Reagan.
yeah. And so what I mean by that is you don't have to love the other guy, you don't have to agree with him, but we got to go back to being Americans, right? So okay, we have a fight, then let's go get a beer. So what? Okay, I don't agree with you on healthcare. I don't agree with you on trans issues. And I know some people say, hey, look, is there a line that goes too far? Yeah, for some people, there's a line that goes too far. But in general, let's go back to listening to one another. We've been yelling at each other. And by the way, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I mean, I think as far as yelling on the internet goes, to your point, yeah, I've done that many, many times. But I try to have a beer afterwards so that we can still be a country together. Okay. And last one is number three is when we agree, let's do something really bold and unite. Okay. And if we unite, we will be invincible. Because look, as I said in that tweet, my mortal enemy is the establishment. The one that says, no, the politicians are honest. No, the donor money doesn't affect anyone. You know, this absurdity of CNN and New York Times pretending that the donor money doesn't affect the candidates and it doesn't affect the bills. When they start talking about legislation and we're talking about, hey, can we negotiate drug prices? And you're not talking about big pharma spending billions, if not trillions of dollars in lobbying and donating to the politicians, et cetera. No, it's utter corruption. And we cannot beat that corruption unless we unite. So if the right wing, if I'm right about the right wing populists, and I made a bet with one of my co-hosts last night, okay, well, I'll tell you about that too. But if I'm right about the right wing populists and we unite on some things that we agree on, I think we're going to be invincible and finally beat the establishment.
Steve, I love that clip. I'm glad you brought that up. I used to watch Sync when he way back early on, and I finally got fed up with him because he was everything he said. He was just the epitome of that one-sided argument and didn't want to listen to anything, and he was over the top. And I finally quit listening to him. After listening to him here, I couldn't be more excited to see that elevation of his perspective and understanding and where he's at to help influence so many people that listen to him and will respect him for the battle he's done. And he couldn't be more right about the establishment versus the populace. And both the left and right populism, a positive populism, or a positive view forward, we can unite, and together we are unstoppable, and we will be able to beat the establishment. And what that establishment means, we'll go into a little bit later, the breadth of that.
Thanks, Michael. And again, the second part of the program today, we're going to be talking about, as that old song used to go, meanwhile, back in the jungle. So while there are people, there are threads of awakening. There are these Democrats who are waking up. The relentless media narrative continues. And I'm sad to say that many of the people who could be waking up and may yet wake up seem to be captured by this narrative. And they're only still listening to the messages that their side is giving, even though they were misinformed. That in fact, their reality check bounced on election day. So, Michael, why don't you share some of the deeper story about how we are given information, where it comes from. I have one thing to say about it. There's a phrase that I heard, that we have a system that is turning us into atomized consumers, meaning that when we're only accessible through our personal devices, through electronics, through the internet, then they have a direct line to your brain. They have a mindset that they're putting on top of your head, like a mindset. And so you're isolated from other people. You heard the people that I just were quoting. They have held their positions to themselves. They could not speak into a no listening. And so there wasn't that dialogue. And so they deprived their progressive cohorts of of a very important perspective that essentially caused them to lose the election.
Since Sink was talking about how the Democratic Party was directing them, and you either adhere to what the leadership's telling you, or you're being canceled, etc. And he said, so let's start with a great article that we'll link in our show notes from Matt Taibbi. From this, documents just made public show how groups aligned with the Democratic Party hit a third-party rival with an array of underhanded schemes that put Watergate tricksters to shame. Here's two quotes. "We can just rig our own poll to make it look as shit as possible," end of quote. "Block signature gathering," end of quote. The above quotes are just a few excerpts from incredible documents made public after a long court fight, details of a plan to, quote, shun, stigmatize, and destroy the third party no labels suggest a Rosetta Stone of corruption, showing groups aligned with the Democratic Party using dirty tricks and elaborate fakery to attack anyone in their electoral path, all while presenting themselves as, quote, and this is really important, pro-democracy forces. So the next piece that I want to show you here is, and I'm just going to highlight a couple points from an email that was in these disclosed documents, came out from an Emily Kane and was CC'd to a Lucy Caldwell, to a group of people that had met on the previous Thursday. And she goes, greetings all. She thanks them all. And she talks about how we have to fight the anti-democratic operations, that is, no labels is essential. Working together as a broad coalition. She details out a plan of how we can manage those prospects, how we can create opposition research. She goes into great detail about it and closes with, please reply to this email by close of day Wednesday, 12/20, to let us know which working group you'd like to join. And this person that's CC'd on it, I want to highlight this Lucy Caldwell, and her email address is at mockingbirdlab.com, from the original Mockingbird CIA project from 1963 with the Warren Commission leaks. Lucy Caldwell, when I read this, I went, wow, where do I know that from? I went and looked up her picture from this group, and I said, I recognize her. I went back into 2021, some of my notes and screen captures from a meeting I was in with the leadership of the Forward Party. She was a senior advisor to the Forward Party, trying to help them get off. So here's somebody behind the scenes who's working in the higher ranks as an advisor of the Democratic Party, infiltrating into the Forward Party as their senior advisor on political, giving them advice on how to become a party, all the while being working, if you will, to just follow them and be able to stop them. She was in numerous, including their one-year anniversary gig. She was considered one of the real knowledgeable insiders, and she sure was a knowledgeable insider plant. So here's an example next that Annette will show on screen, and that is an example of part of their strategy was to, and what they do is they created a totally new website where No Labels was nolabels.org. They bought nolabels.com and then scrubbed and created an almost identical in many key ways and key words website landing page, so that somebody would go to nolabels.com. When they go in and through search engine manipulation, they would be taken to nolabels.com, which is the subversive website built to disparage, distort, etc. We're going to go into the 4Ds of what, so that to undermine No Labels' effort. This is the kind of stuff that they do. And the next thing that we'll show on screen is some notes from their homepage document about the nolabels.com homepage. This is from their working deck. Should feature language and imagery that mirrors nolabels.org, and we should consider including an email and contact capture fields for the homepage. We will display problematic but real No Labels imagery, such as Trump speaking at a No Labels event. The language will reflect nolabels.org while including overt Christo-nationalist dog whistles. Examples being, No Labels now has ballot access in, quote, 14 states with support in 88 countries. So they go on and do this kind of stuff. And this is what's going on, folks. This is how they're controlling the narrative and your perspective. And then I won't go into more details, but just and this is where the people have infiltrated on all sides that are part of this. The Lincoln Project. Here's a tweet from one of their founders. No Labels is out. Today's huge win, and this was after No Labels had dropped out. This is a huge win, is a testament to the strength of the pro-democracy coalition we've amassed since 2020. No Labels is a dark money operation created to throw the election for Trump and failed, but there's still more work to be done. Next up, RFK. So here are these people that claim themselves, this is that establishment, that charade, that the establishment behind the GOP, the grand old party, the old leadership, the Cheneys and stuff that you just talked about, Steve, and that Sink talked about, et cetera. These people now have come out and aligned with their Democratic establishment, and it's those folks and many behind them against the people, the populism. That is what we have to unite around. So now let people, I hope people will sink in on that. This article will be linked that they can go in and read in far more details than I just touched on here. And I encourage you to go and read that article. It'll probably discourage the hell out of you, because you go, how do these people justify calling themselves pro-democracy when they're the exact opposite. And it's that way on so many, many things. So where does this all start? And this is that rabbit hole, Steve, you asked me to take you in. So I'm going to take you down.
Yeah, what's up, Doc? Yeah, what's cooking, Doc? We're down the rabbit hole here. But you know, this is real. This is really, really important stuff because this is how we've been hoodwinked by a bunch of winking hoods who disguise themselves as democracy. This is Orwell on steroids.
Yep. Oh, yeah. So now there's a guy that's come forward over the last number of years, actually, but he's now speaking out and being seen on tons of podcasts and bringing out some important historical understandings of how did we get where we are and where are we really at. And then after we review a few clips from that and talk, we're going to go into some of the most current things that are being done utilizing AI and supercomputers, et cetera, how they are working to control the narrative and manage our perceptions. That's the new thing. It's not just about manipulation and censorship. It's way beyond that, which has now been revealed. So Annette, if you can, let's play that first clip from Mike Benz on the Joe Rogan Experience, episode number 2237, just from December 3rd.
Great, Mike. Nice to meet you, Joe. I wish you didn't have to exist. You're one of those guys that when you talk, like, God, I wish what he's saying isn't true, but I know it is. But I'm happy you do. I don't remember where I first saw you speak, but I mean, right away, I was thinking, okay, this makes a lot of sense when you're explaining like the Ministry of Truth or whatever it is. Is that what it's called? Ministry of Truth?
Well,
they
yeah,
tried to do that for a while. That was, I think, so just as a background, please tell people what you do and what positions you held.
I do all things internet censorship. That's really my mission in life, my North Star. I started off as a corporate lawyer and then worked for the Trump White House. I was a speechwriter. I sort of advised on technology issues, and then I ran the cyber division for the State Department, basically the big tech portfolio that interfaces between sort of big government, international diplomacy issues on technology, and then the sort of private sector U.S. national champions in the tech space like Google and Facebook. So I was the guy that Google lobbyists would call when they wanted favors from big government. But, you know, my life took a huge sort of U-turn, you might say, when the 2016 election came around and I became obsessed with the early development of the censorship industry, this giant behemoth of government, private sector, civil society organizations, and media all collabing to censor the internet. It was kind of a weird path from there.
Now let's jump ahead, Annette, to another clip. But it was so important for people to hear Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan does what Joe Rogan almost always does. He brings forth guests and gets into depth of details that are so important. I can't encourage all of those watching, go to our link and listen to this in its entirety, because he goes into significant depth that we're only going to touch on the very surface of here about where we are today, but how we got here, because it has been an evolution, and this is where we have to change that. So Annette, let's go to clip 2. How did we leapfrog to the path we're now on, Steve?
That sort of set in motion the events that would end the concept of free speech diplomacy as like a U.S. government unfettered good. Because what they argued is we pumped $5 billion worth of U.S. government money into media institutions in Ukraine. That's the figure that's cited by Victoria Nuland in December 2013, right before the coup. $5 billion setting up independent media companies, basically sponsoring Mockingbird style our media assets in the region. And they still didn't penetrate eastern Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine was primarily ethnic Russian, didn't penetrate Crimea. So they said, we need something to stop them from being able to combat our media influence. And they initially called this the Gerasimov Doctrine, named after Valery Gerasimov, who was this Russian general. They took a quote from him saying, "The new nature of war is no longer about military to military conflict. All we need to do is take over the media in these NATO countries, and that's primarily social media, get one of our pawns elected as the president, and that president will control the military. So it's much cheaper and more efficient to win a military war by simply winning civilian elections." So that was called the Gerasimov Doctrine. That's what set up the early censorship infrastructure in 2014. 3 years later, the guy who coined that, Mark Galeotti, would write a sort of mea culpa saying, "Oops, I'm sorry." Gerasimov was actually citing what the U.S. does, but they'd already renamed it hybrid warfare. NATO formally declared that tanks to tweets doctrine, saying that the new role of NATO is no longer just about tanks, it's about controlling tweets.
Yeah, this hybrid warfare. So that's what they did, is they figured out that utilizing these techniques of controlling what is now called controlling the narrative and perspective is more effective and cheaper than tank-on-tank battles. This is a huge, and then they're going to transition from that understanding. So that's why this has been an evolution. And it's important to see it as that. So now, if you would, let's go to the next step of this evolution, where they go from battling originally communism and terrorism to now countering populism and to protect what they're now calling anti-democracy.
But then they did a really cute trick. They went from counterterrorism to counterpopulism. Now, we've always had this ability since the 1940s to interfere in the domestic affairs of foreign governments or foreign countries, to topple communist countries. This was the whole Cold War counter-communism work of the CIA and the State Department. But that was primarily targeting left-wing communists or left-wing socialists or left-wing populist-run countries. When Trump won the election in 2016, this is one of the reasons I think Republicans were so slow to move on all of this. They had never experienced the brunt of the intelligence state against the mainline GOP, or at least the in-power Trump faction of the GOP, in the way that Democrats did in the 1960s and 70s, when the CIA was actively interfering in Democrat Party politics to try to tilt them away from the anti-Vietnam movement, more into the sort of limousine liberal international interventionist neoliberal camp. And so in 2016, the global engagement.
And let's skip ahead now just a little bit to 2153, where he goes to 2016 and jumps ahead here. But that's really interesting, Steve, for you and I and others who came out of those 60s and 70s. When we saw those demonstrations, we saw that, and now to learn, have it confirmed that that was CIA operatives out there taking on the Black Panthers, taking on and using them, funding them, and other groups for the CIA's effort to fight communism.
As they were creating this whole censorship infrastructure.
So the 2016 elections was a counterpoint. That was like a turning point. That was a moment where they realized, like, this is actually dangerous. Like, allowing people to freely communicate online and say whatever they want completely undermines the propaganda that they have been distributing, completely undermines their ability to control who's the president, what policies get pursued, things along those lines.
Yeah, it was the final straw.
That's what they've been working on, controlling who gets elected. And then let's go to now this the current transition that they made from populism and they see as the people's revolt now about institutions, because they realize they can't stop the people and this anti-democracy. So now they're going to focus on institutional consensus. This is really, really important to understand as well.
They argue that right-wing populism was the same authoritarian threat that left-wing socialism, left-wing communism was. And so they said, well, populism is the people's ground up revolt against institutions, against government, science, media, against the NGOs, the experts, the academics. So what they did is they argued that democracy has to be defended from demagoguery. Democracy needs guardrails. We need bumper cars on democracy that go beyond what people vote for, because people voted for Hitler, people voted for Trump, and they were doing this at U.S. government conferences, by the way, in 2017. I can show you some funny ones if you're interested. But they were arguing that we need these institutional guardrails against people voting for the wrong person. And those institutional guardrails are so-called democratic institutions, which is another cute rhetorical trick, because that's the CIA State Department watchword for asset. When USAID, for example, goes in and funds university centers, media outlets, parliamentarian groups, activist groups, legal scholars, you name it, in a region, they are building up their assets to exert soft power influence on that society, on that government, in order to influence the passage of laws, the span of operations that they're doing that touch the U.S. Embassy in the region. And so what they argued is, actually, democracy is not about the will of individuals. It's about the consensus of institutions. So if there's institutional consensus building between the military, the diplomatic sphere, the intelligence community, the NGOs, the media outlets, the universities, that's really democracy. Those are the institutional guardrails, the people who know best.
Again, Mike bends to Joe Rogan, and it was interesting to watch Joe Rogan numerous times in this conversation go, wow, and be discouraged, disgusted by what he was hearing, and confirming what we would thought in the background, much of it, but now we're seeing it there. And there's a quote later in it that I want to draw to people's attention that stuck with me. He who pays the piper picks the tune. I hope everyone remembers that. He who pays the piper picks the tune. When you talk about following the money,
Yeah.
well, who's paying the bills for all of these NGOs and groups, etc., and then suddenly infiltrating them with people who sit on their boards and help control that narrative and manipulate the perception. And oh, by the way, they do represent half of our budget, whatever our fundraising is. We got to do what they've asked, and they trust them. They don't realize how they're being manipulated. And I'm sure some of the things he touched on there, and many of the things you'll hear in that 2 hours, 40 minutes plus, you'll recognize those talking points that we heard across the board from CNN, MSNBC, etc., PBS, the broadcasters parroting those same talking points. Steve?
So, again, I've said this before, and it is more pertinent now than ever before. First of all, there's been great changes since the election, even though the new administration has not taken office yet. There is a new sense of openness. There is a sense of freedom. And there's also a recognition that these are the apocalyptic times, the times of the lifting of the veils. Now, these are the kinds of evils that have been in place, in a way, forever, as part of the empires of mankind, so to speak. And when we took the Nazis on through, if you look at Operation Paperclip, 75 or almost 80 years ago now, when we took that as part of ourselves, when we adopted this Operation Mockingbird, so that we can begin to practice on these other countries and now impose it on people here. These are the times when these secrets are being lifted. And in order to metabolize these secrets, we really need to focus on coherence and love, and that which the vast majority of us who are not sociopaths would choose to have. So it's ugly. It's very ugly. If Joe Rogan is making faces, it's ugly. And so we're part of the vanguard. We're opening the door so that the people who wrote to me last week after our post can now begin to speak truth in their communities. We want to give them cover. And so that's the purpose of this coming to light.
Yeah, and that's a part of the purpose of our work and our show is to help reach to some and hopefully many. Hopefully they'll quit shadow banning us. But either way, I want to go in now because this is important because we want to create this pathway and we want to help people see how to go forward. But those forces are there and the mechanisms that they've been putting in place are all there and they're working their damnedest to keep them going. So how do we, in today's world right now, what can we do to help make sure that we're trying to get to the truth? So I want to go in, we're going to go into just two clips from the Corbett report on a newest tactic that we're aware of called repersoning. Repersoning, in other words, changing the perception of who that person is. And so we have on, so James Corbett has a show with Whitney Webb.
The Corbett Report. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you in December of 2024. But if you can cast your mind back all the way to 2022, you might remember episode 414 of the Corbett Report on the future of censorship, where I laid out the rather relatively, on the big scheme of things, minor case of digital repersoning that was happening to me at that time as I was freshly scrubbed off of YouTube. And yet there were all these Corbett Report YouTube channels popping up that seemed to be me, but were started in July of 2021 by someone in Morocco and were haphazardly, randomly uploading some of my videos some of the time, and I was being accused of censoring myself. It was a bizarre situation. If you don't remember that, I hope you will take a look back at episode 414, because I went into not only what was happening to me at that time, but the greater question of digital repersoning and the future of censorship itself, perception management. It's a pretty deep, dark rabbit hole. And as relatively innocuous as the digital repersoning of me on YouTube was at that time, well, it's becoming more serious in this age of deep fakes and AI created monstrosities, as our guest today unfortunately knows all too well. And I am referring to the one, the only Whitney Webb of UnlimitedHangout.com, who deserves a great deal of introduction, but who needs none because all of my listeners already follow all of her work.
This is a little bit long, and I encourage our audience to stay. It's 2 minutes we're going to play here, 3 minutes. But she'll give you some great examples of how it's being done to her. And then we'll talk about some of the things that we can do, and we'll close for this episode today. So,
you in this digital repersoning future of censorship land that we're living in these days?
Yeah, so like I've had accounts that pop up on platforms where I don't exist, claiming to be me. Mainly on Facebook, where I don't have an account. And, they mix together all sorts of stuff that I do say on the one social media account, conventional social media account I do have, which is Twitter. They'll post some of that and then add things like, Elon Musk is our Lord and Savior, and, things I would never say. So kind of muddying the waters, but that isn't really the biggest problem I'm facing. So the biggest problem in terms of like impersonation and repersoning has actually been happening to me on YouTube. And it started during this period where I wasn't really active, probably for, most of last year and the first part of this year. I have one of my young son who's about 2, had a major health crisis. I was in a hospital for like almost a year. And so I wasn't doing as many interviews. So then these channels started clipping old interviews I had done and then basically editing them into like documentaries, I guess, about stuff I've never talked about, like CERN, for example. And it's not like I don't think there's anything nefarious going on at CERN, right? But it's something I've never reported on or have ever publicly really spoken about. And, saying that I think, there's a black hole at CERN and all of this stuff. Well, that's not really what I'm saying. And then it started happening also I had one appearance in January on a rather large Bitcoin podcast called What Bitcoin Did, that got like 1 million views. And after that, all of these finance YouTube channels started taking clips from that and then superimposing their narration after showing an actual clip of my interview saying that I was shilling a particular token or coin, which I have never done. I do not give financial advice. I've never told people to buy any financial product, including Bitcoin, even though I have, been on some Bitcoin podcasts over the years. And I really see it as an effort to sort of make it look like I have positions I don't have. And there's a lot of different purposes that could potentially serve. And then some of them, too, have attempted to repurpose my Epstein work and lead people to the conclusion that I somehow think it's a partisan issue and not a bipartisan issue, which is unfortunately something that I think certain actors perhaps hoped that I would push my work in that direction, but declined to do so. And so instead, these repersoning people have essentially attempted to do that against, everything I've tried to say or put out in terms of my own work and opinion and analysis.
Well, it's a military analogy. There's a kernel of truth flanked by major distortion and general bullshit. So, this is really, a political education that so few people in this country have had, because this kind of management, this kind of soft cloth totalitarianism has been going on since the Cold War. And it hasn't reached us to the level that it's reaching us now because of how present this new social media is. So I think it's, the truth shall upset you free. So this is the point where, again, I'm using the same analogy. 1965. Very few of us were against the Vietnam War in 1965, but it took 2 years, and all of a sudden, the entire purview of the population of America changed, and it changed because of education. So what we are doing, and what so many people like Whitney Webb and Corbett and so many of the others, and Joe Rogan, they are the teach-ins. This is the teach-ins where we self-educate, where we educate ourselves beyond what we've been told is true. And this is it's very challenging to have your ground of being torn out from underneath you, that the trusted sources that you want to trust. The say it ain't so, Joe. Trusted sources are not trustworthy. And so we're at a time where somebody pointed out, 30% have awakened, 30% will never awaken, and 40% in the middle are the persuadable people who are susceptible to common sense and awareness. And so this next period of time, during the next 2 years, between now and the next election cycle in this country, 2026, which is also the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, by the way, 2026. This is our new independence movement. This is our new declaring ourselves independent from these manufactured narratives that are being piped in, fed to us intravenously or into our minds by these forces, and turning us into zombies. So this is a great place for us to end. This has been a long podcast. Everything that we've aired, I think, is very significant in creating the awareness that we're going to need to take on this, to make Goliath down.
Yeah, and just to close, the last thing I'd like to say to add to that is for people that, this is there's an information battlefield of social media, and we're the targets. And so we have to social media, and Whitney Webb goes into at the end of that Colbert interview with her. I encourage people to go there. The most important single thing we can suggest at this moment, as we close, is go back to the source wherever possible, because people telling people what somebody else is saying. And here we're showing clips from somebody else, so hopefully we're showing them all in context. One of the things the AIs can't do, Whitney Webb, Cobra talks about that, is say, ask people, are you really Michael Maxetti? Are you really Steve? Have them wiggle their fingers in the camera, because AI has yet to get that down very well. So, folks, Steve and I are on this task of trying to help participate in the being part of the education of our people, so that we can come together, seek that whole truth together, so we can get off of the political battlefields, get onto the cooperative playing field, which I love Sink's suggestions. If you disagree, battle rhetorically, debate, but then go have a beer and then listen to the other person. Have 2 beers, have a vodka, get shit faced together, and listen to each other and humanize each other. And then, you know what? When we agree, let's unite, because we are unstoppable. Maybe it takes you a couple days to recover from what the drinking was, but
so is it as our new slogan, get shit faced to face the shit?
I like that. So from political battlefields to cooperative playing fields. I hope you guys follow us, help us get around the censorship and the shadow banning that we're doing. Share with your friends what you've learned here. Go to those. We're going to put up at the bottom of the podcast some recommended sources that I've been following and Steve's been following for many years that are trusted, to help you find some of these good sources. So we'll continue to go down into various foxholes as we defend ourselves from that establishment group, so we can get off the political battlefields onto the cooperative playing fields, so that we can move towards that more beautiful and just world that our hearts know is possible. Thank you for staying with us. Take care.
Thank you.